Thank you very much, Thomas, and hello, everybody. My name is Carl Morelli, and I work at Sands. And today, our topic is going to be building risk-driven, role-based training programs. A little bit about me, so you know the perspective I'm coming from. I primarily have a product management, product strategy background. I've been at Sands for 5.5 years now. And I got introduced to this amazing community about 3 years ago when I took over the SANS Security Awareness portfolio for a little bit of a stint as a product person. And so I've spent several years now in this community learning a ton from you all and from my colleagues at SANS. And I've spent a fair bit of time looking at this particular problem space and helping SANS think through products to help address this problem. And then, of course, working very closely with our customers as they tackle this problem too. So I'm going to share what we've learned from SANS. I've worked with my colleagues on this presentation and give you some perspective of what we're seeing from our customers and some best practices as you roll this out yourselves. I do want to mention to be chatty in Slack. I may be asking you all some questions to share your experiences with the community so we can all learn from each other in the Slack channel. So a couple times throughout the presentation, I'll do that. If you would do that for me, that would be great. It'd be awesome to have some dialogue with you all there. Okay, so as Lance opened us up this morning, I wrote down one of his statements. He said, "We are all here to improve security by focusing on the human side." And we at SANS, we look at this all the time. And so it's super encouraging every year to see how this community grows. And so we can do really what Lance stated. And I want to start here because I want to tell you a little story related to this quote from Gartner. So I want to ask the question, what do Twitch, Move It, and the dark beam incidents have in common? If you have any thoughts about that, drop it in the Slack. Not necessary, but I'm going to explain it. So let's start with the dark beam breach. In this particular case, we had over 3 billion records stolen, including many login pairs, right? And the problem there was an Elasticsearch and Kibana interfaces were unprotected. And there's a bunch of reasons why that was. You can read up on the literature, but basically Elasticsearch and Kibana interfaces were unprotected. Take a look at Twitch. Twitch exposed source code to their platform and earnings data for their users. This was caused by a server configuration change. And then the Move It breach, there were actually two issues going on here. One was a SQL injection vulnerability in the software itself. And then after the company patched it, many systems remained unpatched and exposed. So what do all of these incidents have in common? Well, what they all have in common is, of course, the human factor, but in this particular case, with technical people. Maybe drop in the chat if you all have started addressing this particular problem in your organization, specifically targeting your more technical people, not necessarily security people with your programs. So when we take a look at this particular audience, it's very interesting to see the industry data around the common populations making errors. Now, again, we're looking specifically right now at technical folks. This is the 2023 DBIR. The 2024 DBIR was updated with some more recent information, and it included a couple other types of incidents. So the data isn't as clear as this one was in 2023. But you can see here in this particular case, this was looking at the miscellaneous error breaches and looking at the populations making those errors or responsible for those errors in those particular breaches. And you'll see here two very technical groups, developers and system admins were the ones that were actually making these errors, which is just like what we just talked about with the three cases that I mentioned. So today's topic is all about building risk-driven, role-based training programs. And here at SANS, we consider training and upskilling needs for the entire organization, as I'm sure a lot of you do as well. So most of us here are probably very familiar with role-based training for executives, specific end user roles like HR, finance. And what we'll talk about today are what we're calling on this slide intermediate roles. with further emphasis specifically on technical professionals. And you'll see why as I progress through the presentation. But largely we do this because of what we just learned. The industry data is pointing us towards these roles as especially high risk, but also because the risk management in these roles isn't rocket science, like I just mentioned. And you'll see those case studies play out through the presentation. All three of the breaches mentioned were related to some form of misconfiguration or a human error due to lack of security considerations when simply going through and doing the job. And so we take a pretty keen focus at these intermediate roles, and we're going to dive into that right now. So before we get into what we are talking about and crafting a definition and some next steps around this topic, I want to start by talking about what we're not talking about, actually. So as I mentioned before, most of us have been involved in doing role-based awareness, right? Getting started, we often focus on compliance or specific groups. Like I mentioned, HR and finance are very, very common. And this is super important and helpful and can be done quite well. A lot of you all have probably done this very effectively already. In fact, oftentimes these strategies are indeed informed by risk, which is great coming from our perspective, but they're still centered on traditional awareness activities, right? We're not quite getting into cybersecurity skill development. We're not quite addressing unique risks of more technical personnel or different types of personnel, which is what we're going to get into here today. So what are we talking about then? So first off, as the title implies, we are talking about risk-driven alignment, right? So basically these three statements are how you can sum up what we're talking about today. Risk-driven alignment, we want to strengthen our security posture and culture by approaching cybersecurity skill development in the roles and groups representing specific risk in the business. And we're going to show you a little bit of tips on how to get there and acquire that. We want to target the knowledge and skills relevant for people to do their job securely, not just be aware of security, not just understand I'm a target of social engineering, for example. And I will give some examples of this as we progress. And while we looked at technical roles a few slides ago, our view isn't limited to the technical roles. I have a lot of examples of those because we've helped a lot of customers with that. But this approach can be employed for cybersecurity culture development, perhaps in leadership. For example, we heard from this morning's keynote some tips on how leadership can respond in an incident. Very, very important role-based, risk-informed training, right? So that's what we're talking about. Risk-driven alignment, developing the essential cybersecurity knowledge and skills relevant to that role based on where that risk is coming from. Okay, so now for a SAM Summit, we want to ensure you walk away from these presentations with actionable takeaways. So now we're going to get really into the meat. So how do you begin this journey towards risk-driven role-based training? Now, I am sure all of you know this, but we believe it's really important to start with the security team. You're going to hear me say this many, many times today. They have a keen view and perspective on where risk is, like who's being targeted, the technical initiatives underway that might introduce new risks, the threat model that the team has built. What are the business or mission critical systems and strategies for protecting the company's crown jewels, right? So the security team is a wealth of knowledge. We highly encourage partnering with the security team if you're not already to get this risk data. And in fact, one of the speakers tomorrow, a friend of ours, Nandita, is going to talk a little bit about this and how their organization acquires data that they can action on. So definitely tune into her presentation tomorrow. As you do so, referring to the company's security policies will also be a great asset to you. So oftentimes you can learn what is important to the security team by simply reviewing the policies, right? The security team has spent tremendous amount of effort in writing those policies and writing policies that are actually going to work for the organization, that are understandable by all the users that are reading that, right? And so there's a wealth of information in the security policies themselves. Now, with higher risk roles identified, we need to define the skills needed. I can't sit here and tell you all of those. That is also done in collaboration with the security team or with other experts. So for example, let's say the security team has identified mid-level managers that are being targeted frequently. We might focus attention on more advanced social engineering training, or maybe security culture training so they can support their teams effectively as they attempt to help the security organization and the organization as a whole ensure that we have a strong security posture. So that's just one example. Those types of skills would be something unique to that role. Those types of skills would be targeted at what that role is actually performing, and then how, of course, to scale that out to the organization so we can develop a strong culture. Now, I'm sure it goes without saying that when doing anything new, we want to start small and we want to test, right? Comms are particularly important when we extend our program out. Many of you know this way better than I ever could, frankly. We want to effectively articulate the why behind what we are doing. And incidentally, this is part of what I've done in product management my whole career. Why are we building a particular product? What market problem are we solving with that particular product? Who's going to buy that product? It's very, very similar. And one of the reasons I really was attracted to this community when I started looking at SAN security awareness is that much of what I've done in my whole career, you all are doing every single day. So those comms are super, super important. We want to, again, effectively articulate that why. So what I would strongly recommend is developing a solid elevator pitch that includes how you identified the risk, what your collaboration with the security team looked like, that you're trying out something new in a measured way, and the outcome you expect. Now, in some cases, you might need to also communicate costs, whether those be hard costs, internal costs, et cetera. You may need to incorporate that depending upon your particular culture or your particular program. So let me give you an example of that. So let's say recent events have caused a security team to start an initiative to decrease the time it takes to patch systems while ensuring each patch is tested. Okay, so the security team has made an initiative. They want to decrease the time it takes to patch, and they want to make sure that all the patches are tested well. So your elevator pitch as part of your program might be something like, our security awareness team is partnering with the security team to reduce our cybersecurity risk by getting more effective at patching. We identified the IT admins responsible for patching these particular systems and developed a series of training webinars that we will deliver virtually across 3 different time zones. These webinars will provide instruction and demonstration on our patch test procedure, followed by a quick procedure exercise on our test systems. We expect everyone in the target group to learn the skills needed to patch according to our approved procedures and to escalate patching concerns directly to the security team. Really simple, right? 4 or 5 sentences. That's probably even too long for an elevator pitch, frankly, but 4 or 5 sentences getting at the heart of how you identified the risk, your collaboration with the security team, you're trying something new in a measured way, what the outcome you're going to expect, and what those metrics or measures are as well. All right. So that's about a little bit about getting started. I'm going to give you an example now of some risk factors to consider. So I want to draw your attention to the quote on the right-hand side, and I'm just using some of these examples to show a little bit of how, frankly, basic and simple some of this stuff is, yet not easy to implement. So if you're just getting started with looking at risk-driven role-based programs, you don't want to overlook a really critical part. So when CISA issued its report on the MOVEit breach, it was clear to readers that some fundamental cybersecurity skills were simply not applied, right? So a few that caught my eye when I read this report are listed here, like restricting PowerShell usage and auditing user accounts with admin rights. And these caught my eye because they're concepts and skills that we put in to our IT admin training product that we've partnered with Microsoft to bring to the market on. And it's because they're cybersecurity posture and skills that every IT admin needs to have. And in this particular case, they weren't rocket science, right? Restricting PowerShell usage isn't rocket science. Auditing user accounts for admin rights isn't rocket science. And application allow listing, these are pretty fundamental cybersecurity practices that in the case of the MOVEit breach would have gone a long way to prevent that. So they caught my eye. Now, right now, during the Olympics, right, we are reminded that the world's best athletes become the best by being ruthless about the basics, or what we might call the fundamentals. It's oftentimes the fundamentals that are overlooked, which leads to human errors. So all of this to say, when looking how to drive your role-based training program by risk, we can take the same approach, right? We want to be ruthless about those fundamentals and those basics, like restricting PowerShell usage, auditing user accounts, right? And your security team already has the knowledge on where to focus and what skills to focus on. So again, we want to partner with that security team. So those are some risk factors to consider. And so now I want to take a look at a little bit of advice that we would say has worked well within our customer base when getting started here. So we recommend that you walk before you run, right? And we might also, and I think this goes without saying, but we might also say to stand on the shoulders of giants, right? You've probably heard this phrase before. I had a boss once that would use it all the time, and frankly, it's great advice. So in our case, industry gives us a lot to go on. The DBIR that I cited earlier has identified key groups demonstrating increased risk. Us at SANS and other partners on this call and at this event conduct research and provide products based on industry and our own vendor data, right? So you can start there. Many of these groups and the skills that are needed to prevent breaches like this, like the ones I cited, are all very well understood. We also recommend starting with one target group to start, right? Now, we would love to see the highest risk group possible starting there. But this is where a little bit of the art comes in, right? So it's not all science. There's a little bit of art here too. You also need to consider feasibility. Do you have strong relationships already with leaders in the target group that you can partner with? Can you get support in developing measures to define success? Maybe there are other political factors at play that you need to navigate around. So think about both risk and feasibility, because you want your first group to go well. You want to make sure you're measuring what you're doing, and that you can effectively drive very simple reporting. That's really a key to success. You want to report on who, why, how, the outcomes you gain that will allow you to then extend the program, right? So leadership really needs to understand that. So providing simple reporting and an updated plan is really quite crucial. All right. This is where I'd love to see some comments going on in Slack, right? So these are some common groups among SANS customers that we've identified as being really important, and some good groups that you might want to think about starting with. Now, if you have your own, if you've rolled out some role-based training like what we're talking about here, please let the rest of the audience know. It would be great to collaborate on these things. If you've got a group that you say, yeah, we identified this risk, we went after them, it was highly successful, let us know. If you had a failure, that's fine too. We all learn from failure. Let us know in the Slack what has worked and what hasn't. But the common groups for SANS customers, right, are, I've already mentioned two of them, IT administrators and software development teams. I'm going to give you a couple more examples of those as we go through. Also, given our history at SANS, we work with a lot of organizations that deal with industrial control system security and operational technology. So we focus some attention on that particular group as well, for those working on the floors, et cetera, and some really targeted training, role-based training for them. We've also been working on mid-level managers, right? So we've taken a crack at helping organizations develop strong security culture and posture by empowering their mid-level managers to take on some of the security responsibility, so to speak, in helping the culture mature and helping to coach the people that work for them around some of these security basics, right? And then also senior leaders. So these are some common groups that SANS customers had. Like I said, if you could put in the chat groups that you've worked with, whether they've been successful or failed, that's perfectly fine. And with that, what I want to get to now is a very specific example on why IT admins, right? So on the left-hand side, I'm not going to read this whole list off, but I would encourage you to. There's a lot of reasons to focus on IT admins. Now, on this particular quote, I think it's really interesting, right? The first group, and when I mentioned this group earlier, sorry, I was discussing the MOVEit breach, right? We have a very, very similar assessment here on the Twitch breach, right? And this particular quote caught my attention because of the adoption of the least privilege model for sensitive data, right? That was lacking in that particular breach, right? Now, like I said, I'm not going to read all the points here, but I want to focus on two. And probably recent events are getting me to focus on the first one, and that is patching, right? Patching, and then, of course, the increased amount of security tasks that IT admins are now responsible for that they weren't necessarily responsible before, especially as cloud and hybrid cloud initiatives really pick up steam, right? So these are key areas for IT admin functions where security skills are required, not just awareness, right? So if we treat our IT admins as part of our typical awareness program, we're going to be missing an opportunity to really bolster our culture and develop the skills that are necessary to adopt a least privilege model, for example, to partner with our security team as we implement zero trust, right? These are pretty big initiatives that the security team doesn't do alone, and IT admins are a big part of that equation. So now I want to take a look at a little bit more advanced example. If you're already on this journey to risk-driven role-based training, maybe you want something a little bit more. Maybe everything I said you've already done or you've already considered, or perhaps you're just interested in seeing an example of how far this type of an approach can go. So what we'll cover next, this is directly from the SANS playbook. We use this approach in our program services with our clients, mostly with more mature organizations. So in this case, we've worked with the security awareness officer who has also, as I mentioned, worked with other members of the security team to identify and programatize role-based training for the software development teams. So what I know this is a very busy slide. I'm going to walk you through it very simply. But what we're looking at here is the entire group, right? From leadership to project managers to developers. The goal, of course, is to build a strong security culture that results in secure application development practices. So for the developers, we target training to reduce security flaws in code and promote proactive security as they develop applications. Most of you on this are probably already familiar with these types of groups and this type of training for software development. It's a very common group to target, particularly as there's lots of tools and lots of training available for this particular group. And we might have varying levels of skill development based on the seniority of the dev team member. So we need to consider, okay, a new developer, a more junior developer, maybe coming right out of college, joining our team, they're going to be at a different skill level than our more senior developers or architects. And so ensuring that we have the right training, both lecture-based training and hands-on skill development for the various levels is really, really important. For project managers and IT staff, or maybe scrum masters, or those involved in the software development process, but not necessarily writing code, we look at more awareness of the common vulnerabilities, the industry threats, and the regulatory requirements. We want to be sure that the project managers, the scrum masters, those adjacent to the development program, know how to ask questions and plan for security reviews, right? I will tell you as a longtime product manager, I say the story a lot. The worst feeling in the world as a product manager is when you're a day away from shipping your product and you get a 30-page pen test report that tells you can't ship. Now, thankfully, security has shifted left since I was doing a lot of product management, and that shouldn't be occurring nearly as much as it did. But I will tell you, that is straight panic mode for any project team or product team, right? So we want to make sure that we're asking those questions early in the process, that we're baking in time in the application development process to ensure that we're checking the secure code, that we're architecting secure applications from the start, right? And so we're looking at project managers, IT staff, scrum masters, making sure they are aware of what these security threats are and security features, right? And then, of course, understanding the impact of releasing insecure code like we heard about in the keynote today. For leadership or governance groups, we focus on understanding the risks and making security measures and application development reportable on their dashboards, right? Helping them know when to lean in further with their teams. So now we're going to take a look at that, and we're going to look at the Move It example, bring that back into view, and just see what could be done there, right? The industry data tells us these roles are higher risk, right? We know from OWASP and also from SANS what vulnerabilities expose us to the highest levels of risk, right? And with a comprehensive risk-driven role-based approach, we could be training leadership on security development program, We could be training developers on secure coding against a solid threat model. We could be training PMs and IT operators on AppSec and DevSecOps and the skills to catch, for example, the SQL injection flaw. So you can see here, we might start small. This type of approach can really have a significant impact as you scale it out. And I will wrap now with some takeaways, right? We want to make sure that you have some takeaways, something actionable off of this presentation to go take back in the organization. This is the slide I'm sure you can take a quick screenshot of and have something actionable to take away. So we want to start, again, identifying the high-risk roles and teams in partnership with the security team and industry data. We want to make sure it's feasible to work with that team and have some measures in place to track success. We want to lean on the security team and maybe a threat model to assess which skills these folks need in order to reduce our risk. We want to construct our initial program around this group, complete with comms, skill training, metrics, and of course, reporting to leadership. And then, like any good program, some introspection, revisit and adapt to ever-evolving needs. As you all know, our industry changes all the time. And with that, I will leave you with it. Thank you so much. I'll be hanging out in Slack for questions. I think we've got 3 minutes left. So Thomas, if there's any you want to flick my way, I'm more than happy to answer them here or just take it to Slack.
I think we actually have more than 3 minutes, but we only have a couple of questions that are currently in Slack. It was great presentation, Carl. I really appreciate that. Do you mind popping back to the slide that had the list of the technologies that you asked people for feedback on?
Sure.
While you're doing that, so one of there's actually a long question in Slack, but I'm going to try and just hit the question part, which says, do you pay attention to the problem of the legal status of cybersecurity employees? The person who asked it was talking about some CSOs have fewer rights than unarmed security guards in some places. So I've never heard that, but I don't know about your experience.
Could you repeat it, or maybe let me just look in the slide.
So the official question is, do you pay attention to the problem of legal status of cybersecurity employees?
I can't say I've come across that myself. I will definitely get with my colleagues and write back in the chat for that. I apologize to not be the expert on that one, though.
No, not at all. And he actually talked about a cybersecurity private para-policing policy, which I've also never heard of. So it would be nice if he could expound on that maybe a little bit more too. Give us a link or something. That would be cool. Yep. We'll learn more about that. And there's also another comment regarding OT operations, which I wanted to go back to the slide because I didn't remember seeing it on the slide because I wasn't looking for it. But it looks like you do have OT operators here as one of the questions. Yep. I mean, I think it's got the most likes as people talking about OT. OT is a kind of a difficult part of training folks.
So I'm curious, for those that are on the line for Jim's question, any of you have been working with OT operators and have some advice to share with Jim? Just drop it in the Slack there.
Yeah, because we don't have microphones open, but if you can actually apply to Jim's post and put some stuff in there, that would be great.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I know.
I would say, I'm always reluctant to say this, Jim. I'd rather the community sort of chime in, but I will say, being a product company and a training product company, we specifically have training programs for ICS and OT operators. So that's obviously an option for you. I'm trying not to make this a product pitch by any means, so I'd love for the community to expand and give you some advice too. But do know that we have your back at SANS.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that before my current position, I actually worked for an energy company, and OT was a tough nut. Oh, we got another question came in. Do you recommend considering current behavior of teams to help prioritize your risky groups, for example?
Absolutely. And that's where, if you have that data, fantastic. If the security team has that data, fantastic. I'll mention a few things here that we're really, really excited to see happening in the industry. First is the development of proper human risk platforms, right? And platforms that are out there aggregating data. There's some vendors here that do that today at this conference and at this event. So, and then also, like I mentioned earlier, Nandita Berry is going to be presenting on how they've tackled that at Equinix. And yeah, absolutely, Lauren, that would be a major consideration in looking at the risk and figuring out which groups to target.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know at our organization, so the software development teams are key. And we're working on a program for those executive leadership, but not just that leadership, but also their admins, because those admins have a whole lot of rights and
Yep.
responsibilities as well, not just their leaders.
That's exactly right. And not to pick on them too much, but that's why I focused on the three breaches that I did, because these technical groups, they're like amazing people, like they all got really hard jobs and they're all stressed like all of us, right? But it's pretty common mistakes that are happening that are leading to these big incidents, and we can prevent them, right? We can prevent them with good programs around these riskier groups.